welcome to tonight. I'm really thrilled to have you here. And since bringing you on board, I've decided to do a bit more digging about you and stalking your, oh my goodness, your website is beautiful, and just reading all about you. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, author, lecturer, head gardener, horticulturist, horticultural advisor. I mean, I'm sure the list just keeps on going. It's like, gosh, you've got everything going for you. It's I didn't know where to start. I sort of thought to myself, there are so many of the topics we could even talk about tonight beyond what we've said. It's just
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, I guess that's gardening, isn't it? There's so much to learn and chat
Yeah.
about, and I
And
like myself busy, so
yeah, so give everyone a greater insight about yourself so that we can all sort of get to know you a bit better.
okay. So I've sort of been in love with horticulture and thankfully had it as my profession since I left school. I was originally going to go very interested in art and design and was going to go down that route to university. But I kind of deferred for a year and I ended up working in a garden centre to make some money to go traveling. And that was it, you saw sort of all these different flowers. And then I learned that plants could do different jobs in different locations and you could use them and absolutely just got transfixed by it all. Anyway, I went traveling and had a really nice time. Met family in Australia and wherever else, and whatnot. And I was always interested in the natural world, so I got on there Nepal and places like that, and seen the rhododendron forest. So there was always in the back of my mind, I suppose. But when I came back, it was my mum who sort of nagged me and said, "Well, look, if this is going to be your career, you need to kind of get serious and get a qualification." So I sort of wanted to go to Wisley, but I didn't have any qualifications. So I worked at the garden centre and then studied and got a national certificate in propagation. That's what it was at the time. I think they've all changed now, showing my age. But yeah, that again, it was just another eye opener about propagating and germinating stuff from seed and the excitement and then cuttings and just getting stuff for free. That kind of, I think a lot of us gardeners, we're quite frugal at heart and don't like waste because we think of the environment, we're in touch with nature, looking around us. And so that always resonated something with me as well. And just the ability that plants have to regenerate themselves is amazing. So I did that, went to Wisley, got in there, did 2 years there, studied and worked, and then sort of came out and went and worked in Australia. So I traveled again, looked at the flora of South Africa. I'd been to Japan to look at garden design there. Again, definitely with a heavy influence of art. I suppose that's always been through my life, ever since I was a kid. And then coming back, I kind of felt I actually really needed to utilize. I'm quite good at drawing and have a good eye in some aspects. So I kind of felt I needed to use that. So I was literally, I think by the end of my holiday trip, I met my sister. I hadn't seen her for a year and a half. I'd been backpacking in Fiji for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and met her in San Francisco. And then literally 2 weeks later, I was having an interview in London in Pimlico for Arabella Lennox Boyd.
That
And
is
I,
so cool.
oh my
As soon
gosh, yeah.
as soon as I saw Arabella next point, I was like, oh my goodness, how amazing
I
is
mean, it
that?
was a real steep learning curve. I think I only got in there because she liked the drawings I'd done of orchids and things like that. I mean, I knew a lot of plants. I'd done really well actually at the Wisley diploma. I got a best practical student and things like that. So my practical knowledge of gardening was always quite strong. And yeah, luckily got into there, but did find myself in an office mostly for 2 years, which anyone who does the commute to London probably can understand. But actually, based in an office, it was quite a long period. So after 2 years, I desperately needed to get out, and I became head gardener here, and I've been here 17 years, which is quite astonishing. Yeah. So I had an interview with Arnie Maynard. I saw there was an Arnie Maynard garden and thought, oh, that's kind of the caliber that I've been used to looking at, and I thought it'd be quite a nice project. And got on really well with the owners. I've done a lot since, as you've said, which is I think why I partly stayed here because we all like to grow and learn, and it's a private garden, so we don't have public interaction, and so it's literally just a case of finding inspiration elsewhere, visiting other gardeners, talking to other gardeners. I do teaching, writing, yeah, all these things to keep it all interesting and just keep my sort of thirst and hunger going, I suppose.
it helps you to meet like-minded people as well, doesn't it? I think
Uh,
in the world of
really does.
horticulture, being
Yeah.
grounded in one garden just branches out all over the place. It's
Yeah. And
really
it's really,
cool.
one of the gardeners who I work with, I've got a lovely team. She said, it must be so hard to see the garden afresh, because you're in it for so long and it's becomes your world. And exactly that, just talking to other gardeners, having chats like this, is the best tonic really for that, and getting ideas and inspiration and other people's thoughts on what you're doing. So
And I think also being in a private garden, you tend to gravitate to other private gardens, do you find, rather than your big, okay, you've worked at Wisley, so you've had a taste for the
yeah,
public sector. But when you're in a private garden, it's so different, isn't it? There's sort of
yeah,
an instinct to it.
it is. You can kind of, it becomes your world and your kingdom. So maybe I'm a bit scared to leave that. I don't know. But you become so familiar with it, with every detail, every aspect, which I think is a real important thing with gardening, is just the observation and being in touch with your environment. The other thing which I really, really feel privileged of is, and I've had other opportunities to go and work elsewhere, and people have asked, but I have a small team and I garden every day. I'm out there gardening, and I really enjoy it. And so I know that with like you say, the bigger gardens, as you go up the career steps, you're actually going back into that office space again, which I wanted to avoid. I mean, on a rainy, cold day, perhaps it's quite a nice thing to get in there and do a bit of
Yeah.
planning or design, but actually, being out there with the plants, and even on a really freezing cold day, there's beautiful, some of the views that you get and the footage you put on Instagram, which I'm sure everyone here knows about, just those magic moments.
But your photography is beautiful as well. Do you carry a camera
Oh,
around with you, or is it just your phone?
that's just a phone. I mean, I've got a digital SLR that I haven't got out in ages, because I used to really love photography, coming from the art background and things like that. But actually, yeah, no, I'm literally racing around gardening most of the time. So it's just with the iPhone thing.
Yes.
Are we allowed
Yeah.
to mention brands?
And your dogs Mavis and Jeff,
Mm,
they are just, I mean, a garden isn't a garden without sort of, I suppose, are your dogs the resident dogs, or do the owners have dogs as well?
they have dogs. They have three spaniels. Thankfully, they all
Yeah.
get on. So Mavis and Norman it is come out with me now. Norman's just, well, he's turned 2 and he's got they're wire-haired Dachshunds for anyone want to know the breed. Mavis's are like one of the couch ones, and happy to just sit around and basically beg for treats. Norman, on the other hand, has got quite a strong hunt drive, so we've had to get him a satellite collar. And last year, specifically when he was young, he was just chasing the deer off the fields and everything. It was a bit of a nuisance, but he's calmed down this year, and they're pretty good. They just tend to hang around a lot.
Yeah.
So, it's good. I mean, I'm sure as he settles down even more, a year or two, they're the best companions. I mean, all dogs are, aren't they, to have around in the garden if you can.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get stuck into the topic that we wanted to talk about tonight. So, in all your years of garden experience, of the importance of garden structure, as in structures, hedges, screens, what give us an insight on why you feel that they're important in a garden.
Well, I think they do two or three really fundamental things. Firstly, they provide, a habitat. So a habitat, whether it's for overwintering invertebrates, mammals, bats that can perhaps use it as a summer roost, but habitat for other plants. This is the most important thing. I've taken on a field sort of 4 years ago, 5 years ago, new site, blank canvas, and it's so exposed. It's only a mile and a bit down the road, so the conditions aren't that different. It's heavy clay rather than sand, so that's something to consider. But actually, it's so much colder in the wind. So plants are fantastic for creating that microclimate for other plants to coexist, whatever your conditions. And hedges do that in a fundamental way. The next obvious thing, I suppose, is it really defines the design, doesn't it? The structure of the garden. It's something to divide a space with, to create excitement, and especially now as we're going into winter. I mean, hedges are obviously there all year round, and they can be fantastic backdrops for your plantings. But now they really do become fundamental. Again, and the space changes, voids that were full of soft loveliness become these kind of bigger spaces, and the hedges become so much more pronounced, and hopefully we've clipped them and they're crisp and they're looking fantastic. So that's the other really big, I think, big thing for hedging. And then the other thing, which I think is with hedging and topiary, is they have this magical link between buildings and gardens, because they sit somewhere in between. And I always refer to it as organic architecture, because it's living, it's growing, so it's a plant, but
You
actually
messed up,
it's not,
messed up
is
my
it?
question.
Pardon?
I had a big question for you. Hedges, art or architecture?
Well, this is it. I think they can be
You just
both,
answered it.
can't they? And they really are. And long are the days where we have to stick to them all just straight, or you can get so creative. The world over, we've had trouble with box, but actually, it's making us be more resourceful. As anything in gardening, you face a problem and you have to think around it. And it's the ideas, the thoughts, the changes, and I've got lots of examples we can talk about later about that, whatever. But yeah, so that's the third big thing, is that it actually um sits somewhere, and it's so good at bringing the house, sort of linking the house to the garden, bringing it down into the ground and letting the garden expand and linking those two together. So they would be my big key three reasons, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. That was one of the first things we implemented in the garden when we came here, were trees and hedges. That was our main prerogative, was just to sort of get a backbone into the garden to give it a structure and purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's so
and
important, isn't
winter.
it? And whether it's a hedge or like a hedge on stilts, a bleached form or whatever, deciduous evergreen, it really does, I think, give the garden a sense of place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine, as you've worked with Arnie Maynard,
Yeah.
Tom, we've stayed at Alta Bella,
It's lovely,
and
isn't it? Yeah.
it really, we went there in sort of end of the summer. Oh no, yes, it was sort of your birthday around September time, and so the garden was just sort of end of summer, easing into autumn, and
Mm,
it was, we fell in love with the bleached crab apples, and I think that was the first
yeah.
time we'd seen trees or fruit trees manipulated in such a clever way. It sort of opened our minds to,
Yeah.
to how can we implement that here. It's not copycatting. Well, it is and it isn't, but it's sort of seeing someone else's garden and getting inspiration from that, and just bringing it home,
It's
don't you
definitely
think?
sharing. And that's what we all do. And we should all go out and get inspiration, copycat or whatever you want to call it. It's and then creating something unique that's in your space that works.
Well, I was kind of like, oh, we'll put it here at the back, and Tom went, no, we'll make it round. Let's be different. Let's just do something
Yeah. Well,
So
shapes are one of those fundamental things, but then also, you've talked about crab apples, and I've said hedges in loose form. We can talk about coppicing things, so things that are a bit looser, maybe not considered a hedge, and trained fruit is one of them. Um, we traditionally in vegetable gardens, it would all be boxed and look quite neat and all the rest of it. But actually, those sorts of hedges house so many slugs and snails, which I've already mentioned is great for wildlife, but actually not good for vegetable growing. And actually, so in Arnie's, they've around the vegetable beds step over apples, and they almost act like hedges, like miniature bleached. Blossom time, you've got amazing blossom, you have the leaves, you have the developing fruit, and they create this structural kind of barrier, which in a sense acts a bit like a hedge. So yeah, they're wonderful, wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
his moving away from hedges to clipped shapes.
Mm.
Arnie's clipped shapes. What's the word for? Are they tiered
The
structures?
ones
Or
where when they've got it,
yeah,
there are many, I
what's the right
expect.
what's the right description for them?
You know what? I
Is it
probably don't know. Some of them I refer to as beehives or tiered beehives.
okay? Tiered,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's books, and much like the trained fruit, especially the French absolutely loved it. So I'm sure you could find some specific classics of that. But for me, it would be, I'd be describing it quite crudely in terms of pyramids, tiered, as you say,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
aggregated, yeah, that sort of thing. So
Okay.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love those. Yeah.
Yeah.
we've grown one from nothing,
Yeah,
from a,
I mean, I think in terms of when you start going to topiaries again, and again, it's definitely part of this conversation. So important again in the winter, but also if you repeat them, they can start to break up wind currents and things like that quite gently. And then of course going into winter, they become fundamental. But actually in summer, I find topiaries are really good at anchoring soft planting. You know, they're a real nice contrast. And of course, they do the other thing that hedges do in terms of they speak to the building as well as the garden. So, yeah.
May I?
Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to add that I find in my garden, because it's small and there's a lot happening in my garden, that a hedge and topiary also gives it like a resting point between all the flowers. The green backdrop makes it all less heavy, more like I said, a resting point for the eye.
Definitely. It certainly does. It's exactly that, like a focal point. And it's funny, I do a talk on winter gardens, and it's about creating visual movement and rhythm and things that move quickly. And although it's in the winter, you can still have that when you start to think about shapes. So for curved and soft shapes, the eye will move along quite slowly and gently. And then for fast, it's straight lines. And then you can create these full stops with nice rounded shapes that the eye, like you say, will sit upon and rest. And when you're right, in contrast to a busy herbaceous border, it works ever well. Yeah.
Yeah.
A really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of equate it to a landscape almost, which is why I say the verticals are a bit like church spires in a landscape, things like that.
Yeah.
Got the similar shapes.
Yeah.
Rolling hills and
absolutely.
Definitely. I mean, some of our undulating hedges we took as inspiration from the Downs. So we're quite close to the South Downs, and in the winter on a frosty morning, the low sun hits the Downs, or in fact in the evening, and you get these lovely wavy shadows. And we definitely use that as inspiration for a lot of the box. I've sent you some pictures in the wall garden. That actually works really nicely. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's your? I mean, do you have a go-to hedge plant?
Okay. So I'm a bit of a classic man, I suppose. So obviously I'm avoiding box, but we still have box that we're struggling with in places. I quite like yew and beech. They're two of my favorites because I'm on a free draining soil. If I was in a heavier soil, perhaps I would use more hornbeam, because that can take the heavier conditions. But I love the dark evergreen smartness of the yew, sorry, and the fact that it can take herbaceous up against it, and it can take that shade. And then the beech, I love the contrast, clipping beech, and you get that lovely coppery tone. I think it's really nice. For a small evergreen, sort of nodding towards box, I quite like Lonicera pileata. I don't know. It's got an elongated leaf, so it's not like Nitida, but although it does grow quite quick like Nitida, but it's more low growing rather than sprawling up. So you can create some lovely sort of natural sort of undulating domes and organic shapes that way. You can also use it formally and get some nice rectangles. So they would probably be some of my go-tos. But I've tried lots of other things in the past. What about you guys? I mean, what are you finding favorites?
A lot of yew, as you said. Beech we love because it keeps its leaves, so you've still got the shape that you wanted. And I mean, beech seems to take a feral beating actually as well, doesn't it?
It can, and it's so good at really reducing. You can obviously cut back quite hard when it's old to regenerate a hedge, but it takes a while to come back. Whereas beech is pretty good. After a few years, it will start to fluff up again and give you a nice shape.
We tried Ilex crenata.
Oh yeah, me too. How was it?
Totally bad. Just very, very unsuccessful. We were really disappointed. However, we didn't put it in great ground. It's quite free draining.
It was at the bottom of Portuguese laurels to sort of form a formal square at the bottom of Portuguese laurel. And whether they took too much of the nutrients away, I don't know.
Funny you say that. we used it to replace a knot, and it was in a shady area, so obviously damp and whatever else. And I had it in there for 3 years, so I was patient, but it just didn't really move. And the growth it did put on was quite angular and sporadic. It wasn't filling out. I did try and feed it. This is one of those classic things. So in the end, instead of a hedge there, we actually edged it with London Pride and used white aquilejas, and we now create a structure using just wooden posts and weaving willow, and so you still have that shape, that structure, but not necessarily the hedge, and that's again that whole thing I said about, as gardeners you get problems, don't you think about, working around it. I mean, something I quite like is this idea of hedging, but not with hedging plants, so using grasses. The real upright ones can be quite fantastic. And we use Hackett and Clover macra in big domes below trees. So actually they look like big giant sort of topiarized domes through all of the summer and into winter. In fact, when the leaves have turned fawny, it's only when we cut them back completely, sort of January time, to let the bulbs come up, that actually you lose that topiary shape. And then other things like which often lots of people, especially people who don't have much space, creating wire frames and using climbers. I've seen it abroad in Australia where they've used Muhlenbeckia complexa over wire frames. There's topiary forms and they clip it regularly. Ivy's another one, and Tracheospermum, the classic, that lovely clipping that onto wire framed forms is a really good way of getting quite quick.
So that was one of your favorite climbers on your website, see?
Yeah, that was my time spent in Italy, I think, working on some gardens in Tuscany, and it's just on the walls, on the scent is amazing, and it does well in this country even, actually I think it's just so well behaved, and it's fairly ubiquitous, but it's a good doer.
Does it need a hot wall, does it?
Ideally, yeah. I mean, it can take a bit of shade, but the flower leveling goes down there. It can take real heat, as I've seen it in Mallorca, in Australia, sorry, not Australia, in Italy. So yeah, it does very, very happy with that.
So how much space would one take up on a wall?
So I've had some clipped, and I've seen them clipped like mature specimens, and they're probably maybe a meter and a half wide by about 4 or 5 meters tall. So a decent space.
Okay.
I mean, and we clip them as rectangles quite neatly on the front of the house. And again, I've seen that in some villas in Italy where it's all done like that. And they're very old specimens. But you could have it over, you don't need massive amounts of plants to cover a wire frame, really, because once they get there, and same with the Muhlenbeckia, actually, that can go quite bonkers. But there's also, ivies. There's some beautifully leaved ivies that you can get now, that you could use, and they clip really well as well.
We've seen, and I can't remember which garden it was, whether it was either Wisley or anyway, they used variegated euonymus as sort of like a clip parterre, which looked quite
as a hedge or on a fence, because you can get climbing euonymus that you can use.
It was in a sort of like a square parterre section too. Was it?
Wisley have an alternative to box garden, and so it might be that where they've got several different things. But euonymus is a fantastic sort of.
I think euonymus is a love-hate with quite a lot of gardeners. Some people, it's a fun one, but I do think it's quite a tough old plant that has its uses, but I still think it's still trying to make its comeback somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I would, as long as you're not. Lots of people I know lost their pittosporums a couple of years ago in the wet and cold winter we had here. But I would tend to go for like one of the pittosporums, because again, they can take, if you can grow them, they can take quite a good hard hitting with pruning. And there's little ones. There's one called Silver Sheen, tiny foliage. I wanted to grow it on the land for cutting for cut flowers, but actually I first saw it on a new estate on top of like a double wall. So they were using it as a hedge there, and it's still growing really well there, only about 4 foot high. They clip it, and the leaves are absolutely tiny in this glaucous silver color. They're gorgeous. But obviously there's quite a few pittosporums, golf ball, what's the tall one? Green pillar. There's a green pillar that you can use, and I think they work quite well.
We tried Tom Thumb, and unfortunately when we started planting the garden in 2008, and then we had the 2010 serious frosts and snow, and it killed quite a few plants. You know, I had a cercis, I sporum, and I just thought, actually, you know, this is a lesson for me to pull back. You know, we're in a pocket here, and anything that doesn't like too long the prolonged frost, and it lingers here as well. You know, as much as I wanted to replant another one, it was tempting. I just thought, don't do it. You know, that's a lesson.
No, it's so true. And again, like and that comes down to the wet and the cold. So I was thinking you guys weren't far from Krug, and the stuff that they can grow there and we can't. It's
we're not as coastal as them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you're in a bit. Yeah. So where we are, we're obviously in the south of England, so just below the South Downs, sort of on the northern side, and we're in a low frost pocket next to a river. So free draining soil should be fine, but actually because of the wet, when it comes to winter, and then if we do get hard cold, we sit cold for a while as well. And it's just that you know, I found planting on ridges really, really helpful for that. So if you've got a really heavy soil or young plants, especially just getting their roots in, definitely if you can create a dome, a ridge, whilst they're young and just establishing those roots, that certainly helps with a lot of things. So yeah. But equally, you know, you kind of have to kind of get a bit real and go, okay, maybe I can't grow that. I'll have to think of something else, you know.
Yeah.
Height. How do you decide the height that you're going to let your hedge grow to? Because I remember, I think it was Gressgarth. We went there and we noticed specifically that it was sort of eye level. They were cut to sort of 5.5 foot maybe.
Apart from midget me that had to sort of lift it. But
we've let
I'll be the same, Jenny.
I was about 6 foot, I think. Yeah. I'm thinking maybe we need to drop ours a bit. So,
I mean, that's definitely one consideration is visually what you can see, but that whole golden ratio and proportions and also what you're relating it to. You know, it's nice to have things stepping down in sequence. So if you've got a tall wall or something, having something that's lower, maybe somewhere in between the two to graduate is quite nice. So for instance, the wall garden, there's gates, and then there's old box hedges either side of the paths as you come in the gates. You know, having them the same height as the wall would obviously feel a really constricted, you know, claustrophobic space. So bringing them down, but then we've echoed the shape of the wall. So we've rounded the tops to make them softer, which is quite a nice appealing way, as opposed to them being angular, where that can actually feel quite hard and pointed. And so, yeah, we've gone down for almost just above waist height there, because that allows views, but actually it still gives you the formality of entering a space. It's all about what's going on in the space. I think there is some, you know, the golden ratio that you can use. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but without Googling or looking it up. But in terms of getting the ideal proportion, but I'm a big, and when I'm clipping as well, a big fan of standing back and looking. Keep standing back and looking, because you can get quite into it and hang that. But actually, and even to the point sometimes, especially some of the domes and that, we don't use any forms, we don't use any string lines. It's all a case of getting your eye in, standing back and looking. And in terms of hedge cutting, I'll always do a rough cut first of all. So I'll go over and give it the rough cut so you can sort of start to see the shape you're forming. And then again, go and have a cup of tea, not a gin and tonic, because you're going to end up with something quite organic, I think, by the end of it. But yeah, have a cup of tea, come back and look and just look, okay, it needs shaving off there. So you go over the whole thing and you refine it, and then stand back and look again, and then just iron out the creases. And so that's, I think, how I would, in terms of gathering heights or widths or anything like that, it's just about what feels right in the space. And if you're growing your hedges from small plants, you'll have that time to fill the space and to start to think, actually, yeah, this is right. This could be thicker. This could be not, you know.
Some of our taller ones are just governed by that's how tall our ladder is.
Yeah, I mean, that can work as well. Exactly. It's great for getting a straight line. When you think, okay, this is comfortable to hold the hedge trimmer at this height, I don't want to be up here, so I'm doing it here. You know, that can also be it. Exactly that. And you know, you're on the comfy top run of your ladder, and that's it.
It's really fascinating. You say that concept of sort of doing the rough cut and then walking away and just looking at it again. That's exactly the same concept in hairdressing.
Is it?
I'm a hairdresser. Yeah,
oh
yeah. But we don't.
My mum's a hairdresser.
We don't exactly leave our clients and leave them and say, I'm just gonna have a cup of tea and I'll come back and look at your hair.
Same with painting, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'll do the haircut.
Exactly.
I'll blow dry it, and then I'll sort of take a step back, and then I'll turn them round and look at it through the mirror.
Yeah.
So I'll stop looking at their hair with my eyes, but I'll turn it round and look at it through the mirror, and then bring them back again, and then you have a fresh look again. Yeah, it's
really interesting. And again,
fascinating how the same concept is.
I mean, you could use it for hedge cutting. I haven't done, but you could use it. I do use it sometimes for arrangements, taking photos, because the lens does see something differently that your eye doesn't, a gap or something in terms of color. So for border design, I know we're talking hedges, but it could maybe work for hedges as well. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not against people who go, let's set up a line, let's make it exactly straight. And I think if you're taking an old hedge back that's really crooked, you need to have a line and a point of reference from somewhere, so in that respect. But actually, when you're developing young hedges and going along, and I always, when I've got young hedges, I'll just tip them in season, like once or twice, just to try and get them dense, because you obviously don't want them getting lots of long growth by the end of the year, and then that weighing down and it all starts to sag, and you want to keep everything quite tight. So developing that structure, so I'll often trim them a couple of times in the year.
Yeah, well, when we first planted our beech hedge in the house garden, we put the plants in, so they were so big, and then Tom chopped them in half once he planted them. I went berserk. I was like, what are you doing? He's like, well, they need to bush out. I'm just going to chop them in half.
Yeah, I mean, they do that. That's one of the best things you can do with fruit, and roses, it's like that tough love, but actually, whilst the root system's establishing, and you're right, if you can get a nice dense structure to start off with, then later on in years it will pay you dividends because it won't fall apart as much. So yeah.
There we go.
Top points, Tom.
We had a bullock came into our garden when we were in our previous garden, and it sort of decimated. Was it a cherry? Some sort of tree at the end of our garden, and it came back just sort of bushier and happier than ever.
I mean, I think if the plant is healthy, I mean, obviously there are plants that are not so vigorous, but generally, if the plant is healthy and it's got a strong root system, it's that whole thing of pruning fruit. If you prune hard, the regrowth you get is tenfold, because the root system has all this energy in the spring. It's sucking up all the water, the nutrients are there, and it's going, what do I do with it? Okay, bang, I'm going to go. So yeah. Whether it's
healthy plants, Melissa had a question about box. Do you want to?
Yes.
Do you want to ask Melissa?
Yes. Okay. I always learned to cut box twice, like the first time before the longest day, so before 21st of June, and then a light clipping in September or beginning of October, just to make it sharp again.
Yes.
But this year I had some blight with all the rain, and somebody commented, like, you must clip it one time in a year at the end of the summer. What do you do?
So we have quite a bit of it, and we try and clip through the summer when it's dry. So the cloud that we are really trying to preserve, that's clipped through the summer when it's the driest point for us, because it's the less chance for the blight to sort of spread, and if we do get a wet summer, and this year's been really tricky, we get it really wet. I have clipped stuff as late as sort of October before the box hedges in the wall garden, but the problem is with that is if you clip them then actually the cold kind of sears the bud, so they're quite late to come to green up the following year, which can, one of the things I love is fresh box leaves with blossom. It's so, and they're all the fresh perennials coming up. It's so nice. And that, I've noticed that actually doing that, the box is quite late. It's almost like 3 or 4 weeks even to leaf up. So I would avoid that. I would always try and do it earlier. And then, just like you say, a light where you've got the odd sporadic bits in September, just give it a tidy. I mean, and that, I think you're doing fine. It's just, unfortunately, that it's one of those years. But we tend to do one main cut, and if we need to tidy up, tidy up. So try and limit the clipping as much as possible because blight can enter through the wounds. But if you've got it, it's going to spread anyway. So it's a case of trying to do any sort of cutting during maybe 2 or 3 days of dry weather if there is.
Yeah.
So I know the head gardener at Highgrove, I had a chat with her many years ago about what she does, and that's exactly what she said. They just watch the weather, and whenever there's 3 days of dry weather, they will clip. But other than that, so it's gone are the days where it was Derby Day, and this is when we cut, in May. It's kind of just trying for the health of the box, really.
So twice a year is not a bad thing then. That's
it's not a bad thing if you've got decent dry weather.
okay. Well, we didn't this year.
No, I mean we didn't even in the summer, did we? It's been pretty miserable. So again, it's a case of, as gardeners, we do have to. There's not one rule that fixes everything, and it's not always in May. Do it in May or June. It's responding to what the weather's doing because that's what the plants are doing. That's what the pathogens are doing.
Okay.
So I mean, if you have, like for box blight, if I have a period of 2 or 3 weeks of really dry weather and I notice the weather's going to change, I know that the blight will start up at that point because the spores would have gone dormant and then they almost come back with a vengeance. So I know then not to cut it then. So I'll be like, okay, June, July are probably our driest months. Sometimes we have a lovely September and going a bit into August maybe. But so that's when I try and get a lot of the box done. Yeah.
And the sun, like scorching?
There is a bit of scorching, which isn't ideal. But unfortunately, it's better than the alternative, which is the blight spreading.
Okay.
You can obviously sterilize your shears, or if you're using hedge trimmers, sterilize those and just use a weak disinfectant solution. Wipe it down between going between plants. But actually, if there's an area that has blight, perhaps leave that bit to the end and then do those bits.
Okay.
We actually this year we hoovered our box hedges.
Yeah, Tom said that.
We literally got the hoovers out because they got, after we cut them, the blight came through because, as I say, it's been a wet year and it took a lot of the leaves off and it was just sitting on the top, on top of the leaves that hadn't been affected. And I was just like, we just need to get that off as a source of infection. I mean, I don't think it's physically impossible hoovering below the bottom of every hedge because it's impossible. Sometimes using mulch to try and bury any resting spores that way, but it's a tricky one. And if it gets to the point where the box, I mean, it has got to the point with us in places where I want to replace it. I priced up for you last year and also a couple of years ago. I spoke to Arnie about it and he said there was a really good organic sprayer that he recommended for me, and I've contacted them and we tried them this year. Sadly they're not organic, or the spray because I got the details of what they were spraying, and it's a fungicide they use on brassicas. But
what's that called? Is it sort of light brown granules?
Yes.
I can't remember the name.
Yes,
we got it. I got it too.
Yeah. That's one of them. I mean, there are several. There's Swift. There's Octave. They don't do anymore. And doing tank mixes like that. They're all various fungicides, that can help. Certainly do help.
I sort of slightly saw it as the nuclear option, really, because it
is, and I'm not really at odds with it because as a gardener, I didn't start to garden to spray things, and B, there's a lot of box in the area very close to where we grow food. And
I always use top boxes. It's from the Netherlands. That works quite well. Only this year, because we had so much rain, blight did start at the end of the summer. But I can say my box actually looks quite good with use of top boxes.
That's really good to hear, because that's just copper, isn't it? And it's not anything particularly nasty chemical wise, is it? It's some base.
I don't think so. I think it's quite on a natural basis. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's always a good one.
Now vacuum cleaner, Melissa.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to do it at night time so the neighbours don't see, otherwise they think
It will be a funny sight.
Erin, do you have any questions at all?
Do you use box trees?
I do. I have many box.
You do.
So I don't. We have I have baby gems. Do you have breeds like that?
There are some, but and there are some new ones coming out that they bred in Belgium, I think, and then actually I think they're trialing them in the US.
Right. So I have a bunch of new breeds that are supposed to fight the blight. That are not supposed to get blight. They're all new. I'm just starting with my gardens or redoing everything. I'm building a. Yeah, I'm in Michigan, so we're covered in snow right now. But I have many plans. I'm building a micro wedding venue.
Oh, fantastic.
And it is pretty already, but I am excited to use hedges.
Yeah. Yeah, they're wonderful. They're such wonderful things. Yeah.
So that's all I knew.
Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to us go on about them and the virtue of...
No, I love it. I'm taking notes.
Teucrium is, you often see Teucrium lucidris. That's again one that's not it's very soft, but as an edger works really well.
What is it?
Teucrium lucidris, and it's quite hardy. It's a type of Teucrium, but it's more of a like a herbaceous plant, but it has a real tight presence and purple flowers. It's really, really, really attractive, and I've often seen that used as edging for beds in a topiary kind of form instead of box, which is
I think you spell it TEU.
That's right. Yeah, TEUCRIUM, and the species lucidris is LUCIDRYS.
Do you know what zone?
Yeah, I'd have to check. I don't know actually, because you guys get really cold, don't you?
Oh yes.
Got you down
I'm
to
zone 6.
Okay.
Pardon me?
What is it? -20? Or well, that's Celsius.
No, we don't get that cold. I'm zone 6. I was zone 5. Now I'm zone 6.
Okay.
But they say to still plant for 5.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. The world over, I think.
Right.
And again, plants that should grow typically in the south here we struggle with, but yeah.
I think it's just try them out. I always sort of give everything the benefit of the doubt. They get 3 chances.
It's like a strike and then you're out, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking of things having chances, what would you do if, let's say, you planted a hedge, you're 3 years in, they're just beginning to get going, and then one plant out of 40 is weak and is not doing so well? What would you do? Would you hope that the others fill the space and take it out?
I mean, I kind of look into it. Again, it depends what species you're growing and all the rest of it. Because things, conifer hedges used, Phytophthora, those sorts of soil pathogens. I wouldn't want that. But yeah, no, that's exactly what I would do. I try and, if it's just rot that's dying in from the tips, cut out the worst back to a central, healthy growth. Try and feed the whole lot. But what will eventually happen is I tend to plant distance wise. I mean, it all depends on what you're doing, but I reasonably, especially when I'm doing hedges that are small or smaller than I want them to be, I'll plant them quite close, so maybe centers of about 35 to 40 centimeters. Obviously it depends on the species. And I remember seeing, this is because I remember seeing one chap plant beech ridiculously close, like almost 20 centimeters apart, 25 centimeters. I was like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. But actually what it did is it A, it gives you the backup if anything dies, but B, it created so much competition that the growth, initially it was obviously very dense, but then the regrowth the years on was quite minimal because there were so many plants competing for the moisture, competing for the nutrients. And so actually he spent less time clipping it. And I thought that's ridiculous. There's far too many in there. And I kind of had to eat my words 8 years later when this hedge looked absolutely amazing and dense and tight. Obviously, I think it depends if you're using bigger plants, you've got to get the spacings a bit bigger. But yeah, going quite a little tighter on the spacing sometimes isn't bad, and especially if you've got a failure like that, it will kind of compensate. I mean, we have really old topiaries, new topiaries, they're buttresses. I don't know if I sent you a photo. And on one side, it's just one plant per one, which is huge because these buttresses are about 1.5 meters wide and about 4 or 5 meters tall. Obviously, taken a long time to get there. When I planted the replica buttresses the other side, I used 5 plants for the same size, for the same space, because it gave me that much so quicker. So it's and at the moment you can't tell longevity wise. I mean, if you've got something deciduous like the lovely domes that Arnie put in, you'll start to see the difference in terms of in the winter when they finally drop leaves. You'll have several stems as opposed to one, which perhaps isn't as aesthetically pleasing. So in that instance, maybe you buy bigger and go with the central stem because that's going to be part of the design feature in certain months. But yeah, I mean, they're interesting things to think about, I suppose.
How much did Arnie? This is diverting away from the subject slightly. How much did Arnie get involved in sort of telling you about aftercare for the garden once he left you, or did he just say, right, there you are, I'll leave you to it?
He was there for the first interview, so I think he was quizzing me then. I think the fact I'd done things with Arabella and we got genuinely, and we still do get on really, really well. So that helped because I think he could see he could see I understood where he was trying to go and what he was trying to achieve in terms of maintenance, not, nice and tidy, but not to the point where everything feels choked and not alive. And then he sort of kept in touch the following year. So we did a bold plan and we spoke about that and everything. And then he came the next year. And it was at that point he could sort of see that we were coming up with ideas. The owners were also really interested. So I think it's a three-way thing. You've got your designer, you've got your owners, and in my case, the gardener as well. And it's about everyone having an ownership. And he wants his gardens to succeed in the way he envisages, or maybe not in the exact way he envisages, but he wants them to flourish, obviously. And so sometimes that's a case of, okay, if you're giving it the love and you're looking after stuff, okay. I never got any notes off him, which was really, really handy. I mean, originally the box in the kitchen, that was all going to be cloud. But we just didn't clip it for 4 or 5 years because it was impossible. There's so much of it, and to do it all by hand, it would take, I mean, the cloud that we have already takes about 60-70 hours to clip. And so, I mean, that would be 3-4 times as much because there's so much of it. So we ended up creating these waves, which worked well, and still had movement in the shape, as opposed to being quite rigid and set. So yeah, that worked well. But
back to Arnie.
Yeah,
He's got a great eye for detail. That's sort of standout for me.
And he has a real sensitivity, I think, for space as well, and location and just what to preserve.
He's very good at linking the property to the garden as well as
the landscape around. Yeah, completely. He'll often, walk the space around the property to get the feel, and it's very much about. And again, he said everything we've changed and developed and whatever has always been a kind of look back to the benchmark that he set and go, okay, how can we do that justice and keep it at that level? Of course, there's been lots of really fun creative ideas from myself and from the owners and whatever else, but it's always still thinking, actually, Arnie set the tone here, and it's about embellishing that atmosphere and enhancing it, creating it more. Luckily, I mean, it's a really old property. It's from the 1500s. There's some lovely old trees. There's some lovely old walls, buildings, all sorts. Whatever site you have, there's things that you can use. I mean, it's just about. I mean, he's brilliant at identifying those and enhancing them. Yeah.
With hedges, and I know Tom's been slightly concerned about this. With our beech hedge, they have a longevity because effectively you are planting trees that want to reach hundreds of meters tall as
Mm.
a beech would. So we're looking at our beech hedge now, and their trunks are getting steadily bigger.
Yeah.
Is there going to come a point where we're just going to have to rip the lot out and the trunks become too big for the actual hedge itself? Or do
I
we
mean,
just
there will become a point, but I wouldn't have said it will be in your lifetime.
Oh,
I was going to say,
So I mean,
you're more concerned than
what we do is when we've had to regenerate a hedge, when they have got too big, we'll rather than take both sides off, we'll probably whip off one side and go really hard back, to main laterals and they're quite ugly cuts. But the important thing is to go hard on the top as well, because apical dominance, the plant wants to grow up, it wants to become a tree, as you've said. If you just trim the top and the other side quite lightly, then actually what will happen is the energy won't go into that side to regenerate. It will be pushed up. The plant will push it up vertically. I mean, if you can afford to have an ugly hedge and do both sides and the top, then certainly do that. But when you go hard like that, you kind of compromise the privacy that a hedge gives. And so that's why we tend to do one side and then do the other side a few years later. But both times take the top hard. Yeah, that's a good way of regenerating.
And do you feed any of your hedges?
We do mulch a few of the hedges and also just leave the leaves, like blow the leaves under and let the leaves rot down. The box hedges we fed where we're trying to get really strong growth. So in the past we've used things like Vitax Q4, which is the standard fertilizer. Chicken pellets are always good, and then we again mulch with an organic matter, which I think adding organic matter is the best thing. It's kind of just bringing more life into the soil and adding some nutrients as well. So we use a composted stable manure that we buy in, professionally made, to British standards, whatever the regulations are. And yeah, and it's pretty good. And sometimes I will add that when I spray the box, I've used a foliar feed. So seaweed, organic seaweed, and we use that as a foliar feed. And if I've got any topiaries, that are looking a bit tired, either in the ground or in containers, I definitely be giving them a liquid feed. That helps a lot. Again, just diluted Maxi Crop, which is a seaweed feed, Maxi Crop Triple, which has a lot more trace elements. It's a really good standard one. Yeah, so we use that, which certainly helps.
Yeah, great. You got anything else?
I'm questioned out.
Have
you got any questions?
Oh my goodness. Purpose. Privacy. We've talked windbreaks, decorative, privacy, styles. What do you say? Yeah, noise reduction. Are the hedges and plants effective at blocking noise?
Well, I remember talking to someone in planning about this, and they were saying for actual real noise reduction, you need a boundary planting of about 25-30 meters.
Wow.
To properly reduce noise from a really what it does do is I think the visual aspect it helps. So and maybe I mean if you're clipping it so dense it creates, because walls, hard surfaces can reflect noise and bounce them around. But yeah, softer foliage and that, I mean, it dissipates a little, but to have a real, they were saying actually, you need a really thick boundary to have any major difference. So I mean, I would always go for things like water features if it's a noise, or something that rustles or like that. But I definitely think the psychology behind it, if you can't see the source of the noise, that certainly helps.
Yeah.
I did wonder whether there was a sort of a favourite plant for perhaps shady areas, but maybe that's you.
You would be one of them. I mean, in woodlands and that, I do quite like, which is a bit boring, Prunus lusitanica. It's quite as big boundary kind of hedging options. Going smaller. What's going smaller? Again, the Lanissera that I've mentioned, that does well. People say Sarcococca, but I always think it looks a bit twiggy and horrible after a few years.
They're not really hedging, are they?
No. I mean, depending if you give them a good clip in spring, then they can look fluffy and nice through winter. But I would treat it as like a soft topiary or a soft hedge rather than actually trying to get something quite crisp. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I mean, I've seen camellias used as hedging, and in fact painstakingly cut with secateurs. Which and they tolerate shade really well. But yeah, yew is what that's why I mentioned it to start with. It's one of my favorites because it can take so much.
Have you used variegated yew at all?
No, we've used golden yew. And actually, we've got 2 golden yews in quite a shady spot, and they are almost reverting. So there's one point in the year when they do look quite golden, and then they kind of go this green, sort of slightly hungry look. But yeah, I haven't used variegated yew. So have you?
Well, some seem to have sort of seeded from somewhere in our garden, and we've got about, not many of them, we've got about 6 or 7 of them. So we can topiarize them, but not do a hedge. So I'm thinking of some form of topiary.
I wasn't even aware of variegated yew actually, which obviously shows me I've been so stuck in my garden and haven't really.
Well, maybe they're just
maybe it's the golden.
They could be golden, but at the moment they are looking slightly variegated.
There's no gold. There's no gold.
They got like a dark green midrib and then gold round sort of the thing. Yeah.
More silver.
Oh, okay.
Really, there's no yellow. It's white, isn't it? It's white.
Yeah, sort of like an albino. Yeah. Version albino.
But they're an accident. So yeah. I don't know where they come from.
Maybe we could have the first ones.
Keep an eye on them, definitely. Propagating.
Yeah, definitely. What about laurel? I've known someone that's got sort of laurel, but she kept it very low clipped, and by just hacking at it frequently, it's kept a nice low for extreme shade.
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, you can do, but it's general laurel, the Prunus Herbaceous. It's got quite a big leaf, and I think regular trimming of that, especially when you see loads and loads of cut leaves, it can look a bit, and I find it a bit coarse. That's hence the Portuguese laurel, and in fact, the variegated Portuguese laurel, I've seen that outside a French cafe as topiarized balls, like standards, but like big standards, and it was beautiful actually. Really beautiful. Yeah. So I'm not opposed to laurel so much. There's a really nice laurel called camellifolia that I want that's got a kind of camellia like leaf, curved and dark green. But I can't seem to find it anywhere. But I mean, that hedge would be amazing.
Yeah.
And smaller hedges, I mean, there's also new on the market or sort of becoming more popular is things like podocarpus, which is a conifer, looks quite like a yew, and you can get, I mean, if colour's your thing, you can go for colourful plants that will colour up quite a lot in the winter, or burgundy coloured or bronze. Again, that takes a little bit of shade, so that's pretty good. And other colourful things, I mean, I suppose there's the things like the Photinia, red robin, if people like that. It's a bit too garish for me, but I reckon if it was used in a really architectural way in an urban setting, it could be actually really funky. But yeah, and there's some miniature varieties of those, as there are new yews coming on the market now.
So is there anything else you want to cover that we may not have discussed tonight, Ben, that you wanted to tell us at all, or
I think
we've nailed everything?
We've talked a lot about hedges, haven't we? Yeah. So I've got a book that I wrote a couple of years ago.
Yes.
There you go. There's my plug. But yeah. No, I'm here to talk about the hedges, and it's been a.
But your book, does your book go into any mentioning of hedges?
It does talk about planting hedges. There is a section in there because it goes through the seasons, splitting them in between early and late. And again, it's a kind of how to. Well, the brief was to do a sort of month by month how to, but focused a bit more on nature. And the editor found me and said, "Look, you seem like the right person." And I was like, "No, definitely. Let's." Not do it month by month, we do it by seasons, early and late, because and I talk about just observation being one of the biggest sort of tools that the gardener can have, and just watching the seasons, responding to what the plants are doing with the seasons. And so each half season there's certain jobs and tasks you can do, and hedge planting is one of them. So again, that's why I suggested it now, because we're coming into the season of bare root, which is the best way to plant hedges. You get much better roots. And I would always, when you get them, look at the roots. You don't really want them too dry, so you might need to soak them in water. I always give them a trim, because the last thing you want to do when you're planting your bare root hedges is folding the roots upon each other, and sometimes you get quite a lot of roots. So I'll get my secateurs and give them a little trim, maybe only taking an inch or two off, but just so that they sit nicely in the planting holes that I plant them in. Mycorrhiza is always a good thing that can certainly help. But I think what I would tend to do is also be adding a mulch to them after planting, and also help reduce competition. So, yeah.
I've got a question, Ben. We've had such a strange growing season because of this excess of precipitation through the season. And our yew just took off. I mean, it was starting to get quite bushy, and I was thinking I'm going to have to cut this. So I trimmed the yew, I think, in August, and then of course it put on extra growth. So let's say that's 6 foot. It then put on another 10 inches or so.
Yeah,
I'm left with this tufty yew hedge. I mean, we've got not miles of it, but quite a lot of it.
So he drives me mad every time we walk into the garden. And shall I trim the hedge? Like, what do you think?
See,
I do it today.
I nearly trimmed it in October, and then I thought, is this just too late? And then, of course, I left it too long. And so I've got that now. I don't know what to, because we're opening the garden in late May next year, and I need it looking spot on.
So I'll let you into a secret. I've still got a yew hedge to trim, and I'm going to do it. And I've trimmed yew hedges in September, and actually they are fine. I've trimmed. I think I've probably trimmed them in January or even February, and then literally 4 days later, seen a lovely frost on it, and go, oh, that looks nice. I wonder how it's going to cope. But it's been fine. Yew is really, really, really tough. I mean, ideally, you want to avoid frost with any trimming of hedges, but Yew's quite super tough. I've never had any problems with it. Even as I say, when I've had a frost a day or two later of just trimming it. So yeah, and I do it sooner rather than later.
What harm can it do if it's just the top?
Exactly. But they say yew's so slow, don't they? And it's not, especially
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, ours went in. What can you see? They were, what were they? Less than 12 inches tall, and now it's a thick 6 foot hedge. Yeah. After 10,
it's quite a wonderful thing, isn't it? To plant something like that and see it come together and think, oh my gosh, again, that's it. The joy of hedges and topiaries, these structures that give you a sense of time, really, don't they? Because visually you can look at it and think, well, that didn't just happen overnight. But it's a lovely journey, I think, as gardeners to go on, where you nurture something so small and you craft it into something.
Yeah, and there's that definite bedding in where you plant them, and then not a lot happens for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden they're happy with where they are, and off they go.
And we spent probably the first 2 or 3 years watering them every summer, panicking. I mean, you can imagine hundreds, like 400 yew babies that we would literally go around on hot days panicking. We're not going to lose these. We're not going to lose these.
Yeah, I know. It becomes a very personal project, doesn't it? And an investment in time and everything. But yeah,
obsession.
Did anyone have any other questions?
Yes, I've got a yew hedge, a few years old now, but is there a trick in how to get them really dense? Because every time I get the feeling when I cut the sides off, I only take the new growth off, but it won't get thicker. You still see spaces in between. So every time I cut the new growth, but it won't thicken up inside.
So something you can, I mean, definitely just, if you feel that there's not enough regeneration and growth coming, making sure it's got well fed is a good thing to start off with to encourage lots of growth. And then what I would be doing is cutting it twice, definitely cutting it twice a year. So it almost has a second, like Tom was describing, a second growth spurt. So simply by getting in there after the main surge in spring, and so maybe early summer, giving it a trim then, and you can go quite hard, or as hard as you need to, and then it will regrow, and then trimming that again, probably September. And even after September, you can get little tufts of about this much growth. I'm trying to think where you are, how long your autumn is going in before winter.
South of Holland. It's I think it's same temperature as the southeast of England.
Okay, so yeah, you would probably still get regrowth even after September. So simply just by cutting it twice, you're literally forcing it to branch more and more and more. And if it's not putting its energy onto those tips, it will start to break from further within.
Okay, yeah,
so
because I always get the feeling I'm just cutting the new growth off.
Yes.
And not the inside isn't really starting from the inside. It's only the tips.
And how long have they been in there, the hedge?
I think 3 years now.
Okay, so they're still pretty young. Yeah.
Yeah, but I bought them like the height of my shoulder.
Oh, okay, so good size. Yeah.
It was a good size. Yeah.
So all you can do is say regularly prune twice a year. So we certainly noticed that with our beech that was becoming gappy, and we were only doing it once a year, and that's really started to thicken up again. Yeah, after the big surge of growth in the spring, take it back, and that will encourage, and then do it again probably end of summer, August, early September. And then you've still got probably where it will at least set buds for the following year. But every time you cut, it's going to set more buds. And as I say, it should push back from further back. So,
okay, thank you. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. What did you say? Which one grows really well in the woodlands?
The laurels that we use, the Portuguese laurel.
Was that?
That we have that as boundary hedging through the woods.
Okay.
But then we do actually have some lovely box trees, and because where we're not clipping them, and we don't have too much don't have too much problem with the box moth at the moment. Then actually they don't tend to get blight in there.
And does it do well in? I mean, I have a neighbor who's putting all her garbage on the edge of my driveway, so I just want to put something down there so I don't have to look at it.
Yeah, and it's shady.
Very.
Yeah, Portuguese laurel is a good one. Yeah,
okay.
And it can get really big if you don't clip it. So you know it can be a decent size to hide a really ugly space.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, really enjoyed that. That was
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah. It's been really, really interesting. And I hope maybe another time we could bring you back and we could maybe talk a bit more about other things that you enjoy
Definitely.
about garden, or even a day in the life of your gardening day. That would be really good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat about anything gardening, to be honest. It's a joy to share and also hear other people, from all over the world this evening.
Yeah.
And telling their stories too, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll let you get back to your evening, Ben, and Melissa and Erin, thank you for coming as well. And we'll hopefully see you. I'll probably see you, Ben, at hopefully we'll get you over here one day as well.
Yeah, I desperately want to come up and see you at some point. So yeah. All right.
All right, Ben. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.